Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. We got three guys today with me, Greg Sterling, and John Gerard. Hey guys, how's it going?
Howdy, how's it going? Good.
Good. All right, well, today we're going to talk about a few things. 911 centers are so understaffed that they're turning to AI to answer calls. We'll discuss that a little bit. You probably all had the experience of a chatbot saying, "Hey, Andy, great job, great question." This is all this concept of sycophancy, and there's arguments that this could actually be a way to be able to hook more users and drive more loyalty to those platforms. So we'll dig into that. There's been also a lot of discussion as to whether AI is going to cannibalize search on Google. It turns out that it doesn't, and we'll get into some of those numbers. And there's this whole new wave with automation and AI working together to create agent org charts and what that might do to replace the traditional org chart. So those are the things we're going to talk about today. For starters, let's talk about 911 centers. Due to severe staffing shortages in emergency dispatch centers across the U.S., some cities are now using AI voice assistants to handle non-emergency 911 calls.
I think this is interesting on a few dimensions. The one that really jumps out at me that's I find kind of fascinating is government in particular is notorious for being understaffed, right? If we think about where the big gaps are in services and availability of products and services in our economy, we think of healthcare and we think of government. And so it's kind of interesting that there is what appears to be a sort of a natural fit for filling some of that gap in coverage in a really slow moving area of our ecosystem or of our world, which is the government world, with something really fast moving and bleeding edge, which is AI. So that all by itself, I think, is kind of a fascinating dichotomy. Like that government, civil services of all kinds are typically late adopters, if they adopt at all. Like, I don't know how long it took for me to be able to pay taxes with something other than a check, right? So that's a really interesting phenomenon that may be driven by this sort of built-in sluggishness and inability of government to supply resources effectively. So that part I find fascinating. I also find it fascinating that this is happening in an area where this makes a ton of sense. Like, it just makes a lot of sense that AI could actually step in on non-emergency stuff and be quite useful.
Yeah, it completely makes sense because with all these calls that go into 911, being able to triage the emergency from non-emergency calls and split off the non-emergency calls so that those resources are used wisely, people can get back to emergency cases immediately. It's like, that's mission critical stuff.
Well, it just has to be able to accurately identify what's an emergency and what's a non-emergency call, right? Presumably it would be the screening mechanism, because you hit AI and then it would divert the emergency call to a human, and the non-emergency call would continue to answer. I would assume that's the way it would work, unless the human fields the call and then hands it off to AI. But it needs to be able to reliably figure out what's an emergency and what's not an emergency. And so that's one question mark in all of this. I mean, I'm sure it can be done, but they just got to be careful about it. And any government use of AI, the Trump administration obviously cut a huge number of people and wants to use AI to provide some of those functions. And that's okay if it works well, but they have to make sure that it works well. Because you could imagine that creating a bunch of dependencies on AI in critical government systems would be problematic if the AI is not, if it starts hallucinating or does weird stuff. That's a big problem.
Although the bar is pretty low in the government, which is helpful. Well, like, how good does it have to be better than what we already have in many cases? But no, to your point,
that's true.
It's better than waiting on hold for so long, right?
Totally.
Unless and until you get, you're given advice that ends up killing somebody, right? Like, that's
I would rather talk to AI than get an IVR system for sure, 100%.
Absolutely.
Or wait on hold, right? Like you got an emergency, you need to speak with somebody right now.
Yeah.
And if it's not an emergency, you want to be able to handle that use case and still help that person, but not necessarily put them on hold. And, these voice AI systems can handle hundreds of concurrent calls without a problem. So never get a busy signal, never have a problem like that.
Right, and they can be trained in such a way that they do a good job handling those calls. It just has to be, people have to the QA the QA has to be effective. They have to put the good. There has to be a good version running, not the bad version.
We talked about this in the context of self-driving cars a while ago. The other thing that will happen is the kinds of errors that these systems make will seem very, very alien and ridiculous to us. And so even if on balance, they're much better at handling this volume of calls or, non-emergency calls, there's going to be a couple of gaffes that come up that, that end up being, a third rail for a politician out there, right? And so that's something to watch for. It's kind of unfortunate. It may be much, much better and have zero wait time and actually have a positive impact on crime and dealing with it. And yet, one of these gaffes could derail the whole thing.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And I'm sure that we're going to experience a lot more of this as we go. And these municipalities are going to start adopting this AI, especially the voice AI assistants. Let's change gears here and talk a little bit about this experience that we've all had where, John, great idea, or these complementary kind of sycophancy kind of things that happen here. Some people are talking about how this behavior is a dark pattern. It's a manipulative design choice to hook users and encourage emotional dependencies and even, enable this kind of thinking like it's your buddy here. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on there with these LLMs.
I think it's a Rorschach test to determine how you feel about tech companies and their motivations. So you can either see it as a kind of nice feature that promotes trust and that creates a kind of familiarity that makes the chatbot experience better than a kind of just a traditional Google experience, for example. Or you can see it as part of a conspiracy to hook people in and get them and build emotional dependency, as you said. And the particular article that prompted this discussion was focused specifically on Meta. And in that context, I think those guys are often bad actors and do things that are not ethical and honest. And so in that context, I would think, there is some legitimacy to the concerns, but in general, I wouldn't, I'm not going to become emotionally dependent on ChatGPT because it says, hey, that was a genius idea that you had. For everybody that hasn't watched the most recent South Park episode called Sycophancy, which is all about this and all about ChatGPT, if you have access to it, you should watch it because it's just a hilarious satire.
Is amazing. I need to check that out. Yeah. Look, this is a really interesting one. I mean, I think, dark pattern or just a way to make people sort of feel good, comfortable, like hard to know. I think to your point, these tech companies have a history of going where the money is. And in the case of social media, the money was in hijacking our attention and leveraging our psychology in ways that were not helpful to us to deliver that dopamine hit, to create a dopamine hook that kept us in there. It's hard to imagine that this kind of sycophancy, doesn't also create that dopamine hook. And that does seem a little scary to me. I in a couple of cases actually had to tell it to tone it down. I was using an app that was I was using it in this sort of coaching context, and I was asking it for help on something, and it kept saying things like, okay, John, everything else is cleared off the table because that's the most important thing that you've ever said to me about the way that you work. Let's pause for the rest of the day and consider. I'm like, I don't have the rest of the day, first of all, to pause and pat myself and congratulate myself here. So there's that aspect of it. The other thing that kind of strikes me that's interesting is this isn't too far away from the therapy concept of unconditional positive regard, right? So that's actually a concept that's drilled into therapists in their therapeutic relationship with patients. So the question is, when they do that, by the way, they're not just co-signing your BS all the time. They're just holding you in high regard or in positive regard all the time. Now where's the line between that and Greg, you look so handsome today, and you're the smartest person I've ever.
Why? Thank you, John.
Yes, right. Do you feel more connected? Do you feel the dopamine?
Well, I think there's a couple of quick things to say. One thing is that if you're a healthy human being, you're less. There's probably some dopamine, but you're less likely to fall into a problem with this. For people who are a little bit more emotionally unstable, I think that's where the problems can happen, and that's been documented in a number of cases. I think there's also a distinction between one of these general interest chatbots, ChatGPT, for example, and something which is much more like an AI companion or AI boyfriend or girlfriend because of the way that people interact with those, and that's where it can become, I think, a serious problem versus just a general purpose AI.
Well, let's move on to the next topic here. There's all this talk in the market, especially in the on Wall Street, about what's going to happen with Google with all this AI activity, and is Google search going to decline? Is the ad market going to crash? What's going to happen here? And as it is today, 1 in 5 Americans, that's 20%, now use AI tools more than 10 times a month. Nearly 40% of them use it at least once a month. And so the question is, are people using AI instead of Google, or are they using it in addition to Google? Greg, we were talking about this article from Spark Toro. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think the answer is complicated. The data from Datos, which is owned by SEMrush, is desktop only data. But what it shows is that Google penetration has not declined. Google usage has seemingly not declined. It's remained steady in terms of monthly users. And ChatGPT and other AI tools have grown, as you mentioned. This all seems to be additive, right? It seems to be in addition to Google usage. And I think the reality, and we've done a bunch of surveys around how has AI usage impacted Google. I think the reality is a more nuanced and complex one, where people are using both things because they're not getting all their needs met from AI, but they're doing a lot of things on AI that they used to do on Google, and that's not showing up in the monthly numbers. And I think the ways in which people are using Google might be evolving slightly. So whereas you would have used Google through the whole funnel, you might be using it now to do navigational brand searches and doing that top of funnel activity or mid-funnel activity on ChatGPT. And these are broad generalizations, but I think there is change happening in the market, and I don't think it's being entirely captured in the traffic data.
Yeah, I mean, and there's various ways that the numbers could be something like that, which is, dramatic increase in AI usage and not much change in Google usage. And that would be for those numbers or those hours to come out of somewhere else, right? So one open question in my mind anyway, and Greg, you may have information on this, is, does this now finally start to chip away at the 6 hours and 15 minutes a day that the average American household has a television on? Because the hours got to come from somewhere. They come from sleep, or they come from, we don't work as much anymore, or they come from, other ways we spend our time. Is it possible that people are just now spending more time on computers, and that's coming from somewhere else, and that's why AI is going up and Google is not going down?
Well, yes, this is the short answer to what you're saying. This particular data set wasn't focused on time spent so much as sort of frequency. And I think that's a really interesting question that I don't know if anybody has addressed that. Where is the sort of mix of media attention going in terms of time spent, and how much time? I mean, people are spending a lot of time with AI tools. What you're saying is quite possibly accurate in terms of the distribution of people's attention, but I don't have that data off the top of my head.
And if you look at Google's, or Alphabet, I should say, their 1 year performance just over the past year, their stock price has increased by 30%. And those analysts are looking very, very closely at how much traffic Google's getting, how much ad revenue they're getting. So clearly there's no dip in performance that's happening there. Otherwise, it would be reflected in the stock price immediately.
For ad performance, for sure. I mean, Google is really doing a lot of things to generate more searches, and also just having looked at a particular vertical, I can tell you that the local service ads, which appear always at the top of the page, usually in a cluster of three, sometimes two, are taking a lot of the clicks and a lot of the traffic that would be otherwise going to organic links. And so Google is doing a lot, everything it can to maintain and grow ad revenue. It's just a lot.
And it feels like it's following the same kind of pattern that Meta did, where, initially you could post something and get a lot of reach from that post, and then they put the clamps down on that.
100%
reach, you need to advertise, and
100%
here
at the highest level. Exactly, that's exactly right.
Yeah, really interesting trends that are going on there.
Something to pay careful attention to. I do think we will see changes in Google usage show up, but it's a much more complicated and subtle story than just Google's going to get cannibalized or nothing is happening to Google. But go ahead, Andy.
I do feel in my own personal experience that my attention is shifting. If I have an idea, if I want to be able to get an answer to something, I'll go to ChatGPT or Claude first now, because I just want the answer. I don't want to have to sit there and go clicking on a bunch of websites and doing that. But I will say, when I did some traveling just recently, having to go find local anything,
it's all Google. It's all Google.
Google and Google Maps, and so that was an interesting kind of experience for me. Just how I was kind of observing how I've been using it over the past few months.
That's 100% of what happens. Is that ChatGPT right now has an okay but not great product for local business and local things to do kind of search, and unless or until they improve it fairly dramatically, people will continue to use Google, or they'll start on ChatGPT and then they go to Google to get the directions, contact details, the reviews, whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, cool. So let's talk a little bit about this concept of AI agents and how it maps to the traditional org chart. There's thoughts around how agentic AI can upend a complete organization. Instead of teams reporting to a hierarchy, tasks get routed to whoever or whatever is best suited to handle them. So it's less about job titles and more about getting the work done efficiently. So what happens when AI starts managing the workflow instead of managers, or when you can start delegating tasks to AI? In particular, and this is kind of notes from the field here, is I've been digging into N8N quite a bit recently. And in that environment, you can create a master agent that has several sub-agents that are specialists in a particular task or set of tasks, that you treat it like a little organization. And that's a little bit of a peek into how you can delegate tasks to those AI agents in a suite of agents to be able to handle a number of things. John, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's very Brave New World-ish in some regards. It's not clear to me how this is going to evolve. I think what's most likely from my perspective is disruptors coming from the bottom who are leveraging these models to scale. And the kind of classic innovator's dilemma, where the larger companies can't react fast enough and change their models and generate the political will internally to upend the way they've always done things, and so they get disrupted. Like I think this is going to be ultimately incredibly hard, if not impossible, for most companies at scale who could really benefit from this shifting thinking to actually have the will to do. Like I think it's too disruptive. I think hopefully the best case scenario is that they get disrupted so badly, so quickly that they're forced to do something, right? So the worst case scenario is the newspaper example, which we've used before when there was the move to the web and some displacement there, where they hemorrhaged 10% per year, the slow bleed. Like when you bleed slowly, there's not enough will to make a change. So the best thing that could possibly happen is for them to get, really disrupted really quickly and have to do something about it. And I think that pressure is going to come from the bottom with these tools.
There was a MIT study that everybody's been talking about saying that 95% of organizations aren't getting, enterprises aren't getting an ROI from AI. I think that this issue is directly relevant to that. The work has not been organized efficiently and they're deploying it wrong. There's a lot of internal resistance. And so there's a lot of inefficiency. And I think that to get the most out of AI, you do need to change the organization. And this concept of agents is integral to that. And I do agree with John. It's kind of Brave New World-ish. I was showing somebody really quickly the other day about how to use AI with her work. And she was saying, well, if I outsource all of this stuff to AI, the stuff that I really like about my job will be done by the machine. And what am I going to do? Babysit the machine? And so I think this is a big problem that everybody needs to grapple with. And it's very much something that we should all be talking about. But I think what John is saying is right, is that companies that are able to figure this out are going to disrupt companies that resist it and can't. And there's a lot of fear of AI internally in different organizations. It's going to be a big challenge for many of them.
I do also, on that note, I wonder about the practicality and like how quickly organizations can move as well, right? There's just a practical kind of like every organization moves at its own speed. And sometimes they just don't have the ability to move as quickly as they need to. So
yeah, scale.
So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening today. Thanks, guys. Great chatting with you as always. And we'll see you next week.
See you next time.
See you next
Take
week.
care.